And welcome back to another episode of the Credit Authority. So excited that you have joined us today. And we have a special guest with us. Of course, every week I bring on the most amazing people. You hear me say it over and over again. Today's guest is no different. Today we have my friend Roy Kessel, the founder of Sports Philanthropy Network. Roy, how are you?
I'm doing well, Rhonda. Thank you for having me on.
It's funny to see you on screen. We were just talking before we started recording that, the last time we saw each other was in Orlando. And we had the opportunity for the first time to actually get together and learn a little bit more about our businesses. But I think what I'd like to do, you have such a unique concept. And when people hear things like Sports Philanthropy Network, they hear about professional athletes and engagement, automatically, right? It's like they get this warm, fuzzy feeling about being in that industry. But for what you do and what you represent in that sports arena is very different. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your journey and what prompted you to create the Sports Philanthropy Network?
Sure. Thanks, Rhonda. And it's different. And that was one of the reasons that created the concept is I had practiced law for 20 years and been involved in lots of different aspects of the sports business world. As an NFL agent, I taught at Northwestern in their graduate sports management program and put together a lot of celebrity and charity golf events, including things for NFL coaches and Tournament of Roses in Pasadena and lots of alumni groups and players foundations. And one of the things that really noticed missing is these athletes have a heart and soul of wanting to give back to their communities. And sadly, they're not given any real training in that regard, and they're not supported in their efforts. And to the contrary, they're sort of led to believe that they're only good for four things when they're not playing sports. So number one is signing autographs. Number two is taking pictures with people. Number three is playing with golf outings, which I love. And number four is going to fundraising dinners. So the common thread there is those are all celebrity functions. None of those are really about giving your heart and soul to a cause or a community and making a difference. And it's not for a lack of desire. It's that the framework hadn't been there before to help guide athletes on how to do that more effectively. And so when we would sit down and have a conversation, these athletes, male, female, right? Nobody gets to be a professional athlete without having an extensive commitment and level of success. It doesn't happen by accident. It's a huge commitment. So these people have poured their heart and soul into their sport. They've been successful and they understand that. And they look back at their communities, regardless of what status they had growing up. They know that they have a platform and a forum to give back and help. So we said, where can we step in and support those efforts and help train and educate the athletes to be more effective in that regard? So that was really the genesis of Sports Philanthropy Network.
Which is so empowering because you and I have spoken before about just being involved with other organizations and figuring out who to support. So when you started this journey only started for you a few years ago. What has been your biggest challenge so far?
I think the challenge with, and we see it with almost every new nonprofit and foundation, right? It's somewhat getting that name recognition, but that's been easier for us. I think fundraising is the number one thing we hear from every organization. There's a lot of money out there, but getting to the money is difficult, especially for new organizations and small organizations. So we did a great job. We timed things perfectly to launch 1 year before COVID. And so you can't pick a better time to be a new nonprofit, right? And we had a great first year. We launched in 2019, right before the Super Bowl in Atlanta. And we held our conference 6 months later. So nobody had really heard of Sports Philanthropy Network. Nobody had heard of our conference, Sports Philanthropy World. And on 6 months' notice, we had 120 organizations participating in person in Chicago, which I thought was great. And we were ramping up for year two, when we ran smack into COVID. But what I found interesting was not only the people that came, but we had inquiries in response to the publicity and social media from organizations in 87 countries around the world that wanted to be part of this network and wanted to participate. And we got a little bit of finger wagging from some of those foreign prospects of like, your country won't give me a visa in time to come into the United States for the conference. We had other people that asked us to bring that conference to different locations, different continents. And that is something we're now exploring with some groups, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, about hosting a version of Sports Philanthropy World overseas as well.
When you hear the fact that it is a not-for-profit, there's a lot that goes behind the scenes. So my first question is, are you still practicing law, or is this now your new passion? There's a difference between a career and a passion project. So where does this lie for you at this point in your life?
Yeah, so it's definitely where all my focus goes. I stopped practicing probably about 2012 because I was doing a lot in sports at that point, actually with concussions, working with athletes and helping guide their recovery through the concussion process and brain health injuries, which is still a big space that we're involved with through Sports Philanthropy Network. So yeah, I haven't been practicing law since that. Those skills still always help in a lot of things we do, but I don't miss the practice of law. I much prefer being on this side and being in a position to help really create true impact in communities, right? Change lives, transform communities. And really, we just got back from a conference in Tulsa, Oklahoma, called Sports ETA, which is a lot of the destination, so convention and visitors bureaus, sports commissions, and event organizers. And it was really interesting to hear how they wanted to create philanthropic impact in these youth sports events and tournaments in this marketplace. If you followed the ecosystem of youth sports, it's billions of dollars that are spent by families that are traveling every weekend, and every sport you can think of: volleyball, softball, hockey, basketball, soccer. And the amount of money that goes through those communities is significant. We had one community tell us they hosted a girls volleyball tournament with 1,700 teams. And it's just an enormous undertaking for the community. And over the last couple of years at these trade shows, we've asked the question, what do you do to create community impact or philanthropic impact while you've got all of these people there? 1,700 teams times, call it at minimum 10 girls, that's 17,000 participants. And multiply that by families, you have 40 or 50,000 people that are in town for that volleyball tournament. That's the same number that relates to a professional sporting event. In fact, they released a survey that they had done on some research that showed 2/3 of the attendees and 2/3 of the dollars that are spent on sporting events are spent on participation sports, not spectator sports, right? So these youth tournaments and all of that make up 2/3 of the ecosystem in the sports and sports travel environment. So we started exploring with them how to create that philanthropic impact, and we built a model that we call the philanthropy overlay. So it sits on top of the tournament, so the event organizers don't have to change anything they do. The host venues and communities don't have to change anything that they do. And we're going to come in and partner with them to do three things: education, service, and fundraising. And we'll work with the event organizer in the community, and we're going to say, let's take an education component while all of these youth athletes and their families are running around. How can we build something educational into that model, right? People aren't going to sit and listen to a lecture. They're not going to watch a 30-minute video about mental health or food insecurity or sustainability. But we've seen some really innovative ways to do it. At this last conference, a group put all of these stickers along the floor of the hallways of the convention center that related to sustainability facts. The state of Ohio created a coalition from all of their destinations, and they created these Ohio facts that they plastered the bathroom. So above every stall and urinal, they had facts about Ohio in terms of getting people. So there's really some creative ways where people will learn in a sense by osmosis. But they're going to learn about a cause that we select. And that cause is something that's up to the destination and the event host. And then putting in a service element. So for example, for this volleyball tournament, our suggestion might have been, let's do a sports bra collection drive. It's one of the
Yeah.
most underutilized items that's not thought about and not collected for people. And many girls in different communities don't have those available. And that's a hard thing to ask.
I want to pause you there. Just remind everybody that this is why we have Roy Kessel on our show today. Let's focus on that. You're going into community after community, and you're selecting these organizations. So now you've determined with the other event hosts to do this drive. Does it vary city by city? You know, what does that process look like? So if I want to support Sports Philanthropy Network and I want to have a better understanding of what my community can do, is it related to only when you're doing these big functions, or is part of your initiative to get other smaller group environments to do this on their own and create their own community impact?
Yes, great question, Rhonda. And it's really both. So one of the things that we've found, and one of the reasons that we've targeted these existing events, is those events are there, they're going on, they've got an audience and eyeballs. But what they haven't done is left behind any type of impact for the community. So when you host mega sporting events, things like Super Bowls, Final Fours, Olympic Games, right? Those level events have a legacy program that is built in already. They've planned a philanthropic activation. They've put a lot of time and thought into it. In the youth sports space, that has not happened. And so what happens is you get, as we just went through the numbers, right? Thousands or tens of thousands of people coming through a community. And many of these communities, right, they're not necessarily New York, Chicago, LA, Houston, right, that are the largest cities in the country, right? They could be much smaller cities, but the impact locally is significant. And so how do we help them raise some money for local initiatives? How do we raise money for the sport that's being played, right? Regardless of what that sport is. We've got a worksheet in a system that we've developed to have those conversations with groups, right? We call it the three-headed monster. You take the event organizer, the destination or venue and Sports Philanthropy Network, and we sit down and say, what is going to be the cause that you want to focus on? There's no right or wrong answer. There's hundreds of great causes out there. And we've seen people explore opportunities with food insecurity. Mental health is one of the top issues we hear about now. It could be LGBTQ, it could be adaptive sports, it could be concussions. There's so many opportunities, but let's help the young athletes learn about giving back, learn about philanthropy. We always talk about teaching people to live generously. What does that mean? It means giving back in some fashion. Everybody's situation is different. It's not for us to judge somebody's pocketbook or their time availability. There's people we know that can live very generously on modest amounts, and there's people who have crazy amounts of dollars that don't do anything to give back. So it's really coming from your heart. If you have a desire to give back, we definitely know how we can help.
I love that. Now, just using my own, I have 5 kids, right? Everybody knows. And when you hear about what you're doing, there's definitely a lack of it in communities. And we live in a nice community, on Long Island, and there was never any mention. And one of the things I said to my husband that, and this goes back years ago, kids grow quickly. If you think about the cost of, when we've talked about this, the cost to be involved in these youth sports, especially travel sports, and how frequent they go through their equipment because of growth. I used to save, I mean, remember, I have 5 boys. We would save all of their stuff. And, everybody would say, well, what do you do with it? And I said, all I wanted to do is make a collection and have this collection like you would do anything else. The cleats, the shin guards, the jerseys, all of this equipment, because it's great that we have the ability. But I think more parents should step up to the plate, no matter what sport it is, and do a collection, even if it's for their own school district, because just because I'm okay doesn't mean my neighbor is okay.
And I think that's an amazing point that people underestimate, right? You can live in an affluent or reasonably affluent or middle class community. Not everybody is on the same platform. And so, my kids went to a school here in suburban Chicago that's one of the top public high schools in the country, but there are still plenty of kids that are at that high school that may be on the free and reduced hot lunch program, or may be needing some of these things. And people's life situations change. I think one thing that's underestimated, you talk about collecting equipment. That's something, there's an amazing group called Leveling the Playing Field that's expanding to new cities, that's created unbelievable system that they've developed to collect, warehouse, and distribute this equipment in different cities. And they're doing an incredible job. But on a smaller scale, right, I've said for years, rent a U-Haul truck on a Saturday and publicize to a neighborhood or a community and have the back of the truck open and tell people, lift up your garage door and take out all of those kids' equipment that Rhonda's been cluttering up your garage, and donate it, because somebody can use that, right? The trick in this system is making sure it's collected and distributed, and that's a lot of work. Just like any nonprofit, if you're doing meaningful work and creating deep impact, it's a business. It's a lot of work. It may be a nonprofit, but you still have to run things in a way that can create that impact. And so it's something that can happen any community on any level. Not everything's got to be done on a national level.
No, and I think with us, when we had every time, every season when we would clean out the garage, I would look at all of this equipment that I spent a ton of money on, and I would go to, I hate to say it, Facebook, into my community page and post pictures, right? Here's 6 pairs of cleats and here's all of this equipment. And you don't realize how badly somebody else needs it until you publicly put it out there. And the response was overwhelming, where I would get private messages, please, can you hold it? I can't get there. I'm a single mom. If it wasn't for being able to have these donations, really good athletes and really good children would have missed opportunities because the parents can't afford it and the kids don't want to push to go into something that creates that, that hardship really for their parents at that point.
Yeah, and I think equipment is a big issue. The participation fees, just the registration fees for a lot of these sports, as you said, the travel sports have escalated out of control. The numbers that we've just seen in some research that was put out by the Aspen Institute and Project Play are disturbing. Right now, they've got an initiative called 63 by 30, which is the goal is to get 63% of the kids playing sports by 2030. Right now, that number is in the low 30%. And it's crazy when you think about a country like the United States and the availability of fields and equipment that only low 30% are playing sports, but the data shows only 26% of the kids get 1 hour of activity per day, which is crazy to me. Like when I was growing up, um, you had two 15-minute recesses, a 30-minute lunch, a 1 hour gym class. So that's 2 hours. And that's before everything I would do after school, run around and play ball for a few more hours. So a light day of activity for me was probably 3 hours a day. And it's just not happening. Even my own kids, right? There's just more
It's a
screens.
different
phones.
environment, and again, just want to remind everybody, we are speaking with Roy Kessel. When you have a few minutes, when we are on a commercial break or after this show, please go to Sports Philanthropy Network, see how you can get involved. We're talking about how the kids and the sports and what's happening in communities. Let's talk about urban communities. I feel like you and I are talking about suburban communities. It's easy for us to relate to communities that we've raised our families in, but you go out as well and see a lot of urban communities. What what is your takeaway, and how can people help more of the urban communities to, I don't want to use the word be philanthropic, but be more involved in sports? How do we get the urban communities more engagement?
There are amazing organizations that are doing work, as you said, in urban communities across the country. I think one of the top challenges that we see in the urban communities is transportation. We take things for granted, as you say, in sort of in a suburban environment, where it might be safe for kids to hop on their bike and ride a mile or two to get to a soccer practice or to a field or to a gym to participate. Or the parents may have enough flexibility to drive them because they work from home or they work in professional roles. That's not necessarily the case in a lot of urban communities. And you mentioned single parents. That's a big challenge and something that people often forget. The statistics in some of the cities, I'm in Chicago, Kayla's in Milwaukee, the statistics of incarceration and the number of children that are growing up without fathers in the household is astronomical and horrifying. And so when you look at the influence that has, and you look at the research on the negative impact on a child's life growing up, most of the research tends to focus on lacking a father, but I would imagine that it would be equally or more disturbing if they were lacking a mother, right? If they had a father. But any single parent household, it's hard to be working, to be taking kids back and forth. You may not have people that can carpool. You may not have a safe environment where that child can walk home from school or take a bike and get to where they need to. So creating those safe spaces for young athletes to be active and play and have something to do beyond, right? And it's almost cliche in Chicago, right? We talk about sports really being an outstanding tool to prevent guns, violence, and drugs, right? How do we keep kids away from those negative influences? It's keeping them active, right?
Yeah.
Just like a vacuum, people will find something to do with their time. And if they're not given an opportunity to engage in something productive, something positive that is energizing for them, something will come in and fill that void.
You work with a lot of organizations, but you also work a lot with, I'll say, standalone single professional athletes. What impact do you think is created into these communities when an athlete who was once, somebody from an urban environment can now stand out and say, I made it through on the other side? Is there anybody that you work with now or you've worked with that has spent time going into these communities, and what impact did it have for those children to see somebody that has created such success for themselves?
Oh, there's hundreds of athletes that have done incredible work in that space. And I think we talk about it frequently. Often the athletes don't even realize how much power they have. They think that many of them, as they start this journey, believe that they need to be um, Peyton Manning or Tom Brady or Tiger Woods to have an impact. And that's so far from the truth. When you go into a school and you go to a youth sports program, your ability to influence kids in that community comes somewhat from your name, but in many parts, in the sense, from your stature. You're a former or current NBA player, MLB player, NFL player. Doesn't matter what the sport is. You know, I live in Chicago, but I grew up in Wisconsin. So in full disclosure, I'm a Packer fan. But you talk to kids around the Chicago area. If a Bear player came to their school, it doesn't have to be Caleb Williams that's the starting quarterback for the Bears. It doesn't have to be a Hall of Fame player. They're going to remember a Bear player came to my school, and that's going to make an impact. Now, it's even better if that player creates an ongoing initiative that ties in with the school, because it creates a two-way accountability. So, number one, when you look at some of the stories of athletes getting in trouble themselves, when they've got that accountability to youth, to schools, I think that it encourages them as well to behave in that sense as a role model. Number two, if the kids know that this individual is going to come back to their school, whether it's quarterly or annually, they don't want to miss that opportunity. They don't want to get detention or do something that's going to prevent them from participating in that opportunity. That's a highlight. And I think that it gives the athlete a platform and a forum to really impart those life lessons. When we've been part of groups that have gone to schools and spoken on all kinds of topics: anti-drug, anti-bullying, literacy, STEM education, financial literacy. These are topics that are really important. And if Rhonda or Roy go and talk, it would be, in a sense, like those Peanuts TV shows, blah, 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 blah. But you put an athlete on stage that has that credibility of having played at an elite level, they'll listen. That person may not be the expert in financial literacy, but their message will resonate. We did that at a Title I high school in Phoenix before the Super Bowl down there a couple of years ago. And we had 500 kids in a gymnasium that were incredible, asking very
To be
insightful.
there, by the way. Our friend Mike Dempsey invited me to do that car ride, and I didn't have the time.
Well, it's impressive. And one of the things that we really value as our community in Sports Philanthropy Network is we get so many incredible people, both athletes and business people like yourself, that understand the power sports has to change lives and transform communities, and work with us to underwrite and sponsor some of those programs. We had Little Caesars that helped underwrite the luncheon so that all of these kids that came got a chance to get pizza for lunch as a treat. We had the players serving the pizza to the kids from the school, and we had little posters, so they were collecting autographs and getting a chance to just sit and talk to the athletes after the presentation.
You know, what an amazing story. And it's such a great journey. I'm friends, as you know, with a lot of professional athletes as well. And I do a lot of philanthropy in New York during the holiday time. And you're right, you know, sometimes just sending an athlete out is the biggest impact. They feel it's this level of pride. And from the athlete's perspective and from the children as well as the adults, you know, they've had an experience. And I think if you can focus on the experience and the takeaway, there's so much value that goes into that collaboration. We do it all the time between the autograph signings and the appearances. People have to remember, they're people too. And I think sometimes their words, and I agree with you, resonate so much more. I could sit in front of 30 people and they go, that was nice. I bring in a friend of mine like Gary Brown, who played for, you're talking about Green Bay, who was in the Super Bowl for the Green Bay Packers. Gary comes in and they're like, oh my God, Gary was here and he said this. I'm like, I said that. So you go back and forth, and it's just, there's so much pride, I think, that we need to put into our communities. Again, just for everybody watching and listening today, just a reminder, we are speaking with Roy Kessel. For the sake of time today, Roy, what I really also want to focus on is more about you and Sports Philanthropy Network, because you have some really important conferences that are coming up. You have one coming up at the end of June. Tell everybody the importance of the conference and who goes to the conference, people that are listening, how do they support that conference so that we can learn more about your organization?
Yeah, so Sports Philanthropy World is our signature conference that we host each year. We've been very fortunate to develop a relationship with KPMG, who is now hosting this for the second year here in Chicago. And they've been incredibly supportive, both in terms of providing the venue and staffing and AV and everything. Great venue. If you've been to Chicago and you know where the Aon Center is overlooking Millennium Park, we're fortunate to get June dates this year, so it's a beautiful time of year to be in Chicago, and we're going to have some fun activities around the conference. So the conference was designed in particular to fill a need that we heard repeatedly as we went to other events and conferences throughout the year, which is people want to be part of a community that is addressing these issues. What we find is at many of the conferences, the attendees reach back to us and they're like, that was great, but now I met Rhonda at this conference, but now I don't see Rhonda and this other group of people until next year's conference. And so the concept of Sports Philanthropy Network was really designed to address that. So there's some ongoing involvement, ongoing community. This year, we're going to open up on a opening reception on a Wednesday night, June 25th, and the conference will be June 26th and 27th. And what we focus on is a lot of education and professional development. We want to help organizations build and grow to become stronger so that they can create more impact. So that will include things like helping teach them how to train their board of directors to be more effective, how to explore fundraising opportunities with sources that many of the smaller nonprofits struggle to access. So that would be things like family offices, like larger foundations, like teams, leagues, governing bodies, like larger sponsors. Oftentimes, the number one thing we hear most often is fundraising is what people are missing, what they think is holding back their growth. But what we find is that it's really more about the relationships and the partnerships and understanding the process, because you may not need to go raise that money on your own. There may already be another organization that has that money. And so how can you partner with them? You may have access to a community that needs that service in a way that that organization wouldn't be able to replicate. And so we've seen some really interesting work from professional teams where they have partnered with their communities. One of the great examples that I loved was during COVID, the Miami Dolphins wanted to provide food in the Miami communities, neighborhoods around Miami, but they didn't go and just take their catering contractor from Hard Rock Stadium and say, okay, we're going to contract for these box lunches to be delivered. They went into the communities of Miami and they identified restaurants, they identified vendors that were native to those communities that we're providing the food that those communities wanted, those communities loved. And so it was really a triple win because you're providing business for a restaurant that may have had to close up. You're providing jobs for the staff and employees of that restaurant, and you're providing food for the individuals in that community. And it's not, I'm not knocking a boxed lunch, but it's the food that is what they would normally go and buy
Yeah.
and consume. And so I think that that's a great example. And there's other examples everywhere we go. One of the things that we love about this job, we talk about meeting the great people that are out there. We love learning how people do it and why they do it. There's no monopoly on relationships. There's no monopoly on ideas. And we really have found the conference, one of the things it does best is create those collaborations. When we look each year after the conference at the number of collaborations that have been built and fostered out of the people that have come. And one of the things we're most proud of is that the community that attends the conference is there for the conference. And so even our speakers that participate and attend, we don't pay anybody to speak. Everybody is there on their own. They pay their own way to get there. They stay and they participate for the whole conference. It's not like many business conferences I've been to, a speaker will walk in at 1:45 to do their 2 o'clock speech. They'll speak from 2 to 3 and they walk out the door at 3:15. They're not really enmeshed or engaged in the community. Lee Steinberg was one of our keynote speakers last year and generously gave his time and spent the whole day answering questions and talking to people at breaks and being there for the Q&A. And it was really a great tone and message for people to understand. Like, nobody's above or below. People might be earlier in their journey in the philanthropy space. Other people have been doing it for 20, 30, or 40 years, but we can all learn from each other. There's new technologies that the people who've been doing it for a long time don't know and don't understand how to implement, how to create a TikTok, how to engage their community. And then there's things that those that have been doing it for decades really have some great insight and can help new organizations and new individuals on that career track learn and develop and help mentor them informally, even if it's not through a formalized mentor program.
I have, just for the sake of time, I do have one more question. So Sports Philanthropy Network is set up as a 501c3, correct?
Correct.
When you're fundraising, what does your dollars go towards?
So our fundraising focuses on the space that we've talked about. On education and professional development is one of the big things, right? Running things like our conference. But we have 3 core things that we focus on as an organization, and we talk about amplify, connect, and educate. And so the amplify side is a media function. We get credentials from the NFL, the NCAA, the Big Ten, other groups to cover the community and philanthropic work that goes on. And so we're fortunate to get access at the Super Bowl and broadcast from Radio Row all week. We did over 70 interviews this past year. We build a wall of philanthropy at events that we go to where the guest will fill out what we call a cause card and put it up on our wall of philanthropy so that as people are walking by and attending, they can see what causes were other people interested in. Why did Rhonda pick that as her cause of choice? We really want to create the dialogue and raise the profile of sports philanthropy, help tell those stories. Too often we see on ESPN or on Fox, right, the negative will carry the day. So somebody doing amazing work will get a 3-minute clip and that's it. Somebody sending out a nasty tweet might be the talk fodder on the shows for a whole week, right? And on the ticker for the whole week. We want to elevate the concept of doing good, living generously, building a pipeline of philanthropy. And so The Amplify, Connect, and Educate, a lot of it focuses on building chapters. We're starting this year to build out some task forces on special interest areas. So those are the things that we spend our time and resources on, because we know that it takes good people to be able to engage the communities.
And what about, lastly, just again, for the sake of time, do you take volunteers? You know, if somebody's listening and they want to learn more and they want to help and support, they may not have financial ability to do so. Do you take volunteers that can help you at your events?
Sure. And there's a lot of ways to volunteer. So it may be, for instance, when we're broadcasting at the Super Bowl and come and help us on Radio Row. It might be when we're hosting our conference or events in other communities. Or as we talked about earlier, when you do the philanthropy overlay with those youth sporting events and you're doing education, service, and fundraising in a community. If somebody has a desire to help, we have no shortage of ways that they can do something. We can take their time and expertise, what they're good at, and we can find a way that they can support our efforts. And sometimes it may not be about our efforts. There might be a better fit once we talk to them in their own community or a particular cause where they really express, this is what I'm super interested in. And we know a lot of the organizations that would be good for them to help.
I love it. Once again, everybody, we were joined today by Roy Kessel. Please go ahead, take a few minutes and look up Sports Philanthropy Network. See whether or not you have an alignment, you have time, energy, resources to give back to your community. Until next time, everybody, once again, you tuned in to the Credit Authority.